Hey there, everybody. My name is Kat Bowser. I'm your resident fantasy therapist, and welcome back to my channel. Those of you here for the first time, welcome. My name is Kat Bowser. I'm a licensed therapist. I'm also a writer working on my first novel. And on my channel, I like to talk about what I consider to be the heart of all writing, and that's the characters. And the heart of the characters is in their psychology. So that's the angle I like to take with pretty much everything I talk about on my channel. So today we are continuing with my trope diagnosis series. This month I've been doing tropes that I'm not particularly fond of, but this one is a little different. It started out as a trope I don't like, but then I realized that it's a more broad topic than that. So we're talking about endings. Okay, so story endings. As a writer, I think this is probably the hardest freaking part of writing a story, whether it's a short story, a novel, a series, a trilogy, whatever. I think the ending is one of the hardest things to write. Um, and I think that it's for good reason because in an ending you're really trying to essentially wrap up loose ends. If you're ending a book that is in a series, you want to wrap up the main plot points but still leave enough that you want your readers to come back. But there is a very odd balance to this that is hard to get right. So first off, let me start off by saying, remember when I said I was doing tropes I didn't like? The trope I don't like sad endings. um, that is purely my preference, but I recognize when a book needs one. uh, for me, myself, writing and reading especially is escapism. I like to go to worlds that don't exist, to people and places and races that I'm not going to find in everyday life. That's why I am drawn to fantasy and sci fi so much, because there's things in these worlds that I'm never going to run into in my real life. And that's exciting. That's something fun to explore. It's for this reason I'm not a huge fan of contemporary, because as well written as most of those stories are, there's things that I can see happening. There's things that I can see reading about in the paper. So there's not this sense of the extraordinary to them. And so that just isn't my taste. Anything that has an element to it that you're probably not going to find in real life, horror, paranormal, sci fi, fantasy, things like that, I'm probably going to really like. If it's something that you feel that you could write and it could happen to anyone and it could happen in everyday life, I'm probably not going to like it. Not because it's not well written, but because it's just not my taste. Sad endings tend to fall into that category for the same reason I like these extraordinary stories. Because I like these extraordinary stories, I like the idea that there is a world or a place where there is justice, there is righteousness, where there is a place where good triumphs over evil. It's cheesy. I'm a big fan of cheese. I will admit it. I love that kind of stuff. That being said, though, it does not work for every story. And I think that is something that I have seen in stories where the ending does not match the story. And I think that's really what I want to talk about with this trope. I think we all learned about in school, the theme of a story, sorting out the theme of a story, what is the message, etc., etc. This is related to that, but I do think it's a little bit different. I refer to it as, what is the feeling that a story gives me? In that, let me use examples. I think that's the easiest way to explain this. Lord of the Rings, my favorite story, period. Reading through it, even though there are these horrible things happening, there are these good guys, there are these bad guys, there are all these wonderful environments, the feeling overall I get from the story is that while there are bad things in the world, there are also good people rising up against sad, bad people. But it is not an easy fight. That's the overall feeling I get from the story. And while you could argue that is kind of its theme, I think its theme is much more I think, concentrated than that. I think this is more of a broad, just overall emotional response that I have to this story. And because of the feeling it gives me, while I wouldn't hate a happy ending, it would feel kind of off. But at the same time, a sad ending would feel off. So what Tolkien went with was a bittersweet ending. A little bit of good, a little bit of sad, and that's what really fit. Same thing if you're writing a story that is very downtrodden, it's kind of talking about the horrors of man or whatever world you're writing about, and it's kind of about how things are getting worse and worse and worse no matter what somebody tries to do against it, essentially a tragedy, and you stick a happy ending on there, it feels weird. It feels like it does not fit because it doesn't fit. And then with a happy ending, and this is probably one that drives me crazy the most, is when the story has been building up this feeling and this emotional response of, okay, there's bad things that are going to happen, but the good guys are still going to win. There's still going to be a happy ending. Some authors like to throw in a sad or tragic ending to throw the reader off. It doesn't work. In my experience, when people do that, all it does is piss your readers off. Now, I'm not saying you can't put in a twist ending. I think that's perfectly fine. But the thing about a twist ending is, with a twist ending, you have to be able to go back, look at the story, and see some hints of, okay, here's why this twist makes sense. There has to be something in the story that when you look at it in retrospect, you're like, okay, I see it, this makes sense. When it just comes out of nowhere and it is in stark contrast to what has come before, it feels cheap, it feels edgy, like it was done just to be edgy, and it just doesn't fit with the rest of the emotional impact of the story. And I think that's really what makes endings, well, for lack of a better word, suck, is when they're conveying a completely different emotional impact than what has been built up and promised through the rest of the story. While we certainly like surprises in stories, I think there is a certain aspect of us that still likes some predictability. And I don't know, I guess for me, endings that purposely try to shift the emotional impact at the last second, I think they fail, because there hasn't been essentially enough of a build-up, enough of a heads up, enough of essentially evidence to make it work for the reader. Now, if you want to do a story where you can't predict the kind of ending, those are fun. But again, I think you have to have it built into your story that in some cases it looks like the good guys are going to win. Then it looks like the bad guys are going to win. You have to kind of swap back and forth throughout your story so that when the ending comes, you could go either way and it would still feel like it fit. And I think this is why authors struggle with endings, because we do have this pressure to, let's make it unpredictable. I don't want my reader to be able to guess my ending. As a writer, I've never understood that. Like, I really haven't. Because, and this is probably why spoilers don't bother me either. Like, if you guys go see a movie or read a book and you come and tell me the ending, it's not going to ruin my enjoyment of it at all. And I think that's because for me, it's the emotional journey of the story. Even if I know where it's going, I still experience it. I still feel that emotional impact. And so knowing where it's going doesn't bother me. And I think that in trying to be so unpredictable, sometimes authors throw away a perfectly good ending that makes perfect sense. It's been built up to, it's something that you can see them weaving the clues throughout the story, and then when you get to the end, they're like, oh no, it's actually this. That doesn't work. It doesn't fit. Most of the time your readers end up feeling cheated because everything that you have built up now has no purpose. It makes no sense. It amounted to nothing, and I think a lot of times readers just end up feeling like they've wasted their time. that is my interpretation of it in any event. So I think it's really important to figure out what is the overall emotional impact your story is presenting. Is it leaning more towards a bittersweet ending because you kind of have mix and match in there? Is it leaning more towards a happy ending because you are putting in symbols of good triumphing over evil? Is it a sad ending because it's a tragedy? And so you throw these things in there where the good guy just never catches a freaking break. um, and it can go either way. I mean, you're in charge of your story, so you can write it how you want. But I think that's why I really think beta readers are very important, because they're the ones that are going to be able to tell you, okay, this feels off. And speaking as someone who has had people beta read for them and has beta read for other people, sometimes there's something in a story that I have literally marked this on someone's story. I sent it back to them. I said, this is really good, but this section feels weird. It feels out of sync with the rest of the story. I can't tell you why, but it's creating a different emotional response in me, and it feels out of place. And that's literally what I told them, because I could not figure out exactly what it was. And essentially what it boiled down to was, it was a section of the story that was going against the emotional, quote unquote, theme of the rest of the story. And so it felt wrong. It felt out of place. And I think that's just something to keep in mind when you're writing, is what is the emotional theme you're doing? Not necessarily a theme in general, but what is the overall emotional path you're taking your reader on? Because I think if we can keep that in mind, we can generally create a fairly competent and satisfying ending. So that's just my thoughts on endings. Thank you guys for chiming in. As always, if you have comments or suggestions, leave them below, or you can go to any of the social media sites I have. If you want to never miss a video, make sure you subscribe and ring the bell so you always know when I upload. I try to upload every Friday, every Sunday. And if you guys ever have any requests for any types of videos, make sure you let me know. I will be glad to respond to them. And until next time, I hope you guys have a good one.